A single mom hugged a millionaire by mistake. In that touch, he found his one true love. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Jeremy Green had built walls so high around his heart that nothing could breach them. 3 years of perfect isolation, 3 years of numbness masquerading as strength, until one desperate woman's arms shattered everything he thought he knew about love, about fate, about second chances. In the chaos of a hospital corridor, Carol Adams reached for salvation and found him, a stranger, a man whose company's negligence had nearly killed her 6-year-old son. But in that moment, in that earth-shattering embrace, neither knew the dark truth that would test their love beyond imagination. She was fighting for her child's life. He was barely living at all. Together, they would discover that sometimes the most unexpected touch can heal the deepest wounds. And sometimes love demands the ultimate sacrifice. Some embraces change everything. This one would save them both. "Please!" Carol Adams gasped, her voice cracking as she stumbled through the hospital's emergency department entrance. "Please, someone help me! My son!" The automatic doors whispered shut behind her, sealing out the January wind that had scattered her auburn hair across tear-stained cheeks. Noah's blood, small drops, but terrifying in their reality, marked her pale yellow sweater like accusations she could not bear to acknowledge. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." The triage nurse looked up from her computer screen, professional compassion replacing irritation as she assessed Carol's state. "What happened to your child?" "Construction accident." The words felt foreign on Carol's tongue, impossible and real simultaneously. Scaffolding collapsed near his school. He was just walking to school, and the world tilted sideways. Carol's knees buckled as the weight of the morning crashed over her like a physical force. 6 years old. Her baby was 6 years old, and men in expensive suits had built something that fell on him. The irony tasted bitter as copper pennies. "I need someone to look at him now," she whispered, then louder, desperate. "Right now!" But the nurse was already moving, calling for a trauma team as Noah's small form was wheeled through doors marked "Authorized personnel only." Carol reached toward those doors, toward her son disappearing into a world where she could not follow, could not protect, could not fix with kisses and bedtime stories. "Ma'am, you cannot go back there. That is my son." The words erupted from someplace primal, maternal, fierce beyond measure. "That is my baby, and you need to wait here while the doctors work. Wait." The cruelest word in the English language when your child's life hung in balance somewhere behind steel doors and fluorescent lights. Carol turned blindly, searching for anything solid in a world gone liquid with fear. The waiting room stretched before her, beige chairs arranged in perfect rows, television murmuring mindless morning shows, other families clutching their own private disasters. She needed air. She needed her mother. She needed David to be the kind of ex-husband who answered emergency calls instead of the kind who changed his phone number twice a year. She needed... "Steady there." Strong hands caught her shoulders as she swayed, and Carol found herself pressed against a stranger's chest. Expensive wool coat, subtle cologne, heartbeat steady and sure beneath her cheek. For one impossible moment, safety existed in the arms of someone who had not failed her, someone who did not know enough about her circumstances to disappoint her yet. "I am so sorry." She breathed against wool that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "I thought you were... I am sorry." But the stranger did not release her immediately. His hands remained gentle on her shoulders, steadying rather than restraining, offering rather than demanding. When Carol finally lifted her head, she found herself looking into grey eyes the color of storm clouds, serious, kind, and startled by their own compassion. "You thought I was someone else," he said quietly. Not a question, but understanding wrapped in careful words. My brother. The lie came easily because the truth was too complicated. She had no brother. She had no one, really, except Noah, and the fierce determination that had carried them this far. I expected, thank you for not pushing me away. Jeremy Green studied her face with the attention he usually reserved for architectural blueprints, cataloguing the curve of her cheek, the determined set of her jaw beneath exhaustion, the way her green eyes held both vulnerability and steel. When had he last touched another human being? When had anyone looked at him without calculation, without agenda, without the careful distance money demanded? Your son, he said, instead of the dozen questions crowding his mind. Is he badly hurt? Fresh tears spilled over her lashes, and Jeremy felt something crack inside his chest, some carefully maintained barrier between himself and the pain of others, the messy reality of lives that intersected with his own. I do not know, Carol whispered. They will not tell me anything yet. Construction accident at the site near his school. Scaffolding collapsed during the windstorm this morning. Jeremy's blood turned to ice water. Green Enterprises was renovating the downtown building adjacent to Lincoln Elementary. Victor had assured him all safety protocols were being followed, that the project was proceeding without incident. If a child had been injured on his company's watch, which construction site? The question emerged sharper than Jeremy intended, drawing Carol's attention to his face with uncomfortable intensity. The old Morrison building renovation. Do you know something about it? Everything. He knew everything about it, and suddenly the warmth of her embrace felt like accusation rather than comfort. Jeremy stepped back, putting careful distance between himself and this woman whose son might be bleeding because of his family's company. No, he lied, the word tasting like ash. I hope your boy will be all right. Carol watched him retreat, noting the expensive cut of his coat, the way he held himself like a man accustomed to boardrooms and power lunches. Rich men, in her experience, rarely lingered in emergency rooms unless they had lawyers with them. Rich men did not catch crying women in hospital corridors without expecting something in return. Thank you, she said carefully, for catching me. Jeremy nodded once, formal and distant as winter morning, then turned toward the elevator bank. Carol watched him disappear behind steel doors, leaving her alone with the smell of disinfectant and the terrible waiting that stretched ahead. She did not know his name. She did not know that her son's accident would become the thread connecting their fractured hearts. She did not know that the scaffolding collapse was no accident, but the predictable result of corners cut and safety budgets stolen. Most importantly, she did not know that the stranger who had held her with such unexpected gentleness was Jeremy Marcus Green, heir to the empire whose negligence had nearly stolen her world. Some truths, Carol would learn, demanded their own timeline for revelation. Jeremy stood before the Morrison Building construction site, watching yellow tape flutter in the January wind like prayer flags marking sacred ground. 4 hours had passed since Carol Adams disappeared into the elevator. 4 hours since her son had been wheeled into surgery. 4 hours since Jeremy's carefully ordered world had tilted off its axis. The scaffolding lay twisted against the sidewalk like a mechanical skeleton, steel beams scattered where Noah Adams had been walking to school. Jeremy could see the precise point of failure, a support joint that should have been reinforced, a safety bracket that had never been properly installed. Sir, Miguel Santos, the site foreman, approached with a hard hat in weathered hands. The investigators finished about an hour ago. OSHA says we can clean up the debris, but the site stays closed until they complete their report. Jeremy nodded without taking his eyes from the twisted metal. Anyone else hurt? No, sir. Just the boy. Lucky the school had not dismissed for lunch yet, or there might have been dozens of kids on that sidewalk. Lucky. Jeremy tasted the bitter irony. Nothing about Noah Adams lying in surgery felt lucky. Nothing about his mother's desperate embrace felt like fortune. "Miguel, I need you to be honest with me. Was this an accident?" The foreman's weathered face went carefully blank, the expression of a man who had worked construction long enough to recognize dangerous questions. "Sir, the joint failure, the missing safety brackets, should this scaffolding have fallen?" Miguel Santos had been building things for 37 years. He had worked for Green Enterprises for 12 of those years, and he had never seen Jeremy Green standing in the mud, asking questions that could cost people their jobs. Usually, Mr. Victor handled site visits, and Mr. Victor asked different kinds of questions. Questions about schedules and budgets, not about whether children should have been hurt. "No, sir," Miguel said quietly. "That scaffolding should have held through hurricane winds. The safety brackets were specified in the original plans, but last month, Mr. Victor said to use alternative mounting systems, said the engineering department had approved cost-effective modifications." Jeremy felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "What modifications?" "Cheaper brackets, different installation process. Saved maybe $3,000 on this project." Miguel's voice dropped even lower. "Sir, I told Mr. Victor those brackets were not rated for the wind loads we get downtown. He said not to worry about it, that the liability insurance would cover any problems. $3,000. Noah Adams was fighting for his life because Victor had saved $3,000 on safety equipment that cost more than Jeremy spent on lunch. Miguel, I need you to gather all the documentation on those bracket substitutions. Work orders, approval memos, any communication about the modifications. Sir, I am not sure I should—" "Miguel." Jeremy turned to face the foreman directly. "That little boy is 6 years old. His mother has no idea yet whether he will walk again, whether he will wake up, whether she will take him home or bury him. If my company cut corners that put him in that hospital bed, I need to know. Do you understand?" Miguel Santos had been around rich men his entire working life. Most of them cared about profit margins and quarterly reports, not about individual children hurt by their business decisions. This was different. This was a man who looked like he had not slept in 3 years, asking questions that suggested he might actually care about the answers. "Yes, sir. I will get you everything." Jeremy nodded and turned back toward his car, but Miguel's voice stopped him. "Sir, that woman at the hospital, the boy's mother, she deserves better than cheap brackets and insurance settlements." "Yes," Jeremy said quietly, "she does." The drive back to Massachusetts General Hospital took Jeremy through downtown Boston, past the architectural monuments that had built his family's reputation. The Green name appeared on building facades and construction signs throughout the city, a legacy of quality and innovation spanning 3 generations. His grandfather had founded the company on principles of structural integrity and aesthetic excellence. His father had expanded those principles into community responsibility and worker safety. Jeremy had inherited both traditions, along with the devastating loss that had driven him into isolation and left day-to-day operations in Victor's hands. Now a 6-year-old boy lay in surgery because Jeremy had been too buried in grief to notice his uncle cutting safety corners to cover gambling debts. The hospital parking garage smelled like motor oil and disinfectant, familiar scents that transported Jeremy back to other vigils, other waiting rooms, other times when medical professionals had held the power to preserve or destroy everything that mattered. He had not intended to return here, had planned to send flowers and a substantial check to cover medical expenses. Anonymous corporate sympathy, clean and distant. But Carol Adams had touched something in him that money could not fix or distance could not heal. The way she had reached for safety and found it, however briefly, in his arms. The way she had looked at him without recognition, without agenda, seeing only a stranger willing to offer comfort in crisis. Jeremy took the elevator to the pediatric surgical floor, telling himself he only wanted information about the boy's condition. Medical updates that would help determine the company's liability exposure. Practical considerations that had nothing to do with the desperate hope he had seen in a mother's green eyes. The surgical waiting room held the particular silence of families watching clocks and praying to gods they usually ignored. Carol sat alone in a corner chair, her yellow sweater replaced by green hospital scrubs someone had given her. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she held a paper cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold hours ago. Jeremy approached carefully, as if she were a wounded animal that might bolt if he moved too quickly. "Excuse me, how is your son?" Carol looked up, and recognition dawned slowly across her exhausted features. "You came back. I wanted to check on his condition. The truth, though not the complete truth. I hoped there might be good news. Surgery went well. No internal bleeding, no brain swelling, broken ribs, bruised kidneys, concussion." Each word fell like stones into still water. "Doctor says he was lucky, a few inches in any direction, and—" She did not finish the sentence. Some possibilities were too terrible to speak aloud, even in relief. "That is wonderful news," Jeremy said, meaning it completely. "When will he wake up? Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow." "Children bounce back faster than adults, they tell me." Carol managed a tired smile. "I keep thinking I should call someone, tell them what happened, but there is not really anyone to call." Jeremy settled into the chair beside her without invitation, noting how she did not pull away from his presence. "No family. My parents died in a car accident when Noah was 2. Ex-husband decided fatherhood was too complicated and moved to California. My support system consists of me, myself, and stubborn determination." The casual way she delivered this information, as if devastating isolation was merely another weather condition to endure, made Jeremy's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. He understood stubborn determination. He had been surviving on little else for 3 years. That must be difficult. Difficult is a relative concept. Carol sipped her cold coffee and made a face. 6 months ago, difficult was choosing between Noah's school supplies and my car payment. This morning, difficult was watching my baby disappear behind doors I could not follow him through. You adjust your definitions as circumstances require. Jeremy found himself studying her profile, the determined set of her jaw, the way her fingers worried the paper cup's rim, the faint freckles across her nose that suggested summers spent outdoors with her son. When had he last noticed such details about another person? When had anyone's struggles felt relevant to his own carefully contained existence? "I am sorry you have to face this alone." Carol turned to look at him directly, green eyes searching his face with uncomfortable intensity. "You did not have to come back here. Most strangers would have forgotten about the crazy woman who grabbed them in the hallway." "I do not forget easily." Something in his tone made Carol pause. There was weight behind those words, the kind of gravity that came from experience with loss and remembering. She had developed an instinct for recognizing wounded souls. It took one to know one, as her mother used to say. "What is your name?" she asked quietly. Jeremy hesitated. The green name would mean nothing to her now, but it would eventually. When the insurance companies called, when the lawyers became involved, when the reality of corporate liability emerged from the paperwork, she would learn his identity and wonder why he had not told her, wonder what he had been hiding, wonder whether his presence here represented kindness or calculation. "Jeremy," he said finally. "Jeremy Green." Carol Adams smiled for the first time since morning, and Jeremy felt something shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates finding new arrangement. "Thank you for coming back, Jeremy Green. I am Carol Adams, and my son is Noah. It is nice to meet you properly." Jeremy shook her offered hand, noting the calluses that spoke of work with tools and computers, the absence of wedding ring, the way her fingers trembled slightly from exhaustion and caffeine, and the particular courage required to hold yourself together when everything else was falling apart. "It is nice to meet you too, Carol Adams." Neither of them mentioned that they had already met in the hallway 4 hours ago. Neither acknowledged that their first introduction had involved desperate arms, an unexpected comfort, and the kind of human connection that changed things permanently. Some meetings, Jeremy was beginning to understand, deserved their own timeline for recognition. Noah Adams looked impossibly small against the white hospital sheets, his sandy brown hair stark against the pillow, monitors beeping their electronic lullabies beside his bed. Jeremy stood in the doorway, watching Carol smooth her son's blankets, with the careful attention of mothers everywhere, her movements gentle and purposeful, and heartbreaking in their tenderness. "Doctor says his vitals are strong," Carol said without looking up. "Kids are resilient, they keep telling me." As if resilience is something children should need to develop. Jeremy entered the room quietly, noting the way Noah's face relaxed in sleep, the faint bruising along his left temple, the careful positioning of his small arm in its blue cast. 6 years old, and already learning that the world could reach out and hurt you without warning, without reason, without offering explanations that made sense. "He looks like you," Jeremy observed, settling into the chair beside Carol's. "Everyone says he has his father's eyes, but I prefer to think he has his own." Carol's voice carried no bitterness, only the practical acceptance of a woman who had stopped expecting absent men to claim their responsibilities. "Blue like summer sky. He says it means he was born to be happy. Smart boy. Too smart, sometimes. Yesterday he asked me why we cannot afford the apartment with the playground. I told him we were saving money for something special." Carol's laugh held no humor. "I suppose medical bills qualify as special in their own terrible way." Jeremy felt the familiar weight of privilege settling across his shoulders like an unwelcome coat. The cost of Noah's medical care, surgery, specialists, rehabilitation would represent a catastrophic financial burden for a single mother working freelance graphic design. For Jeremy, it was less than he spent on wine in a typical month. "Insurance will cover most of it," he said carefully. "You have a lot of faith in insurance companies." Carol's tone suggested she had learned not to share such optimism. "My plan has a $5,000 deductible and covers 80% of approved treatments. Physical therapy is not always approved. Neither are the specialists who make real differences in recovery outcomes." $5,000. Jeremy had spent more than that on dinner the previous week, an evening of perfectly prepared food he had barely tasted while discussing architectural plans he could have reviewed by email. The distance between their worlds felt suddenly vast and shameful. "The construction company's insurance will have to cover everything," he said, though he knew the legal reality was more complicated. Corporate liability insurance companies fought every claim, negotiated every settlement, minimized every payout. They cannot leave you responsible for their negligence. Carol's green eyes sharpened with interest. "You seem to know a lot about construction insurance." Jeremy felt heat rise in his chest. Too much knowledge revealed too quickly, assumptions that suggested expertise rather than casual interest. "I have some experience with commercial projects." "What kind of experience?" The direct question hung between them like a bridge Jeremy could cross or burn. Truth or omission, transparency or protection, trust or safety. Carol Adams deserved honesty, but honesty would end whatever connection was developing between them. Once she learned his company had built the scaffolding that had nearly killed her son, she would see every kindness as manipulation, every gesture as corporate damage control. "Business consulting," Jeremy said finally. "I work with companies on risk management." Not technically a lie. As CEO of Green Enterprises, he consulted with his own company daily about managing various risks. That those risks now included the safety of 6-year-old boys walking to school was a development he had not anticipated when he inherited the position. "Then you know how these things work." Carol's voice carried the weariness of someone who had learned not to expect fairness from systems designed to protect profits rather than people. "They will offer a settlement that covers immediate medical costs and hope I am too overwhelmed to fight for what Noah actually deserves." What does Noah actually deserve? A childhood without permanent pain, college tuition that is not eaten up by ongoing medical bills, a mother who does not have to choose between his physical therapy and keeping our apartment. Carol's hands curled into fists on her lap. Justice would be nice too, but I am not naive enough to expect it. Justice. The word hit Jeremy like a physical blow, carrying implications he was not prepared to confront. Justice would require investigation into why the scaffolding had failed, examination of safety protocols, review of cost-cutting measures that had prioritized profits over public safety. Justice would expose Victor's negligence and destroy the family company Jeremy's grandfather had built on principles of integrity and excellence. But justice would also ensure that other children did not face Noah's fate, that other mothers did not have to choose between medical care and financial survival, that corporate accountability meant more than favorable insurance settlements. "You deserve justice," Jeremy said quietly, meaning it completely and knowing it would cost him everything. Carol studied his face with the intensity of someone who had learned to read sincerity in a world full of pretty lies. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. "Justice requires power, and power costs money I do not have. But maybe justice is not always about winning. Maybe sometimes it is about refusing to stay quiet when someone wants you to disappear." "You will not disappear," Jeremy said with conviction that surprised them both. "You and Noah matter. What happened to him matters. You will not be forgotten or overlooked or swept aside. You sound very certain for someone who just met us." Jeremy looked at Noah's sleeping face, then back at Carol's guarded hope, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For 3 years, he had isolated himself from human connection, convinced that caring led inevitably to loss, and loss led inevitably to devastation. But sitting in this hospital room, watching a mother love her child through crisis, Jeremy remembered why connection mattered despite its dangers. "Some things you know immediately," he said. "Some people you recognize before you meet them." Carol's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked down at her hands. "That is a lovely thing to say. It is a true thing to say." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Noah sleep and listening to the gentle symphony of medical equipment that measured heartbeats and breathing and all the subtle indicators that life continued despite trauma. Jeremy found himself cataloguing details, the way afternoon light painted geometric patterns on the linoleum floor, the soft sound of Carol's breathing, the faint scent of hospital soap, and something floral that might have been her shampoo. When had he last noticed such ordinary magic? When had the present moment felt sufficient instead of something to endure until time passed and brought him closer to what? Jeremy realized with uncomfortable clarity that he had been waiting 3 years for his life to begin again without actually deciding what that beginning might look like. "Jeremy," Carol's voice was soft, uncertain. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "You came back here today. Not many strangers would do that. Not many people have time to sit in hospital rooms with families they do not know." She paused, choosing words carefully. "I keep wondering if you have experience with this, with waiting and worrying and hoping for news that might change everything." Jeremy felt his careful composure crack like ice under pressure. How did she see so clearly through his protective barriers? How did she recognize the particular pain of hospital vigils and medical consultations and the terrible mathematics of hope versus reality? "Yes," he said simply. I have experience with waiting. Did it turn out all right? Your waiting. The question hung between them like a challenge. Demanding honesty Jeremy was not sure he could provide. How do you explain that waiting sometimes leads to loss so complete it redefines your understanding of survival? How do you describe living through the worst possible outcome and discovering that existence continues anyway, stripped of joy but still requiring daily decisions about breakfast and business meetings and whether human connection was worth risking again? No, Jeremy said quietly. It did not turn out all right. Carol's eyes filled with immediate sympathy, and she reached across the space between their chairs to cover his hand with hers. Her fingers were warm and calloused and completely gentle, offering comfort without demanding explanation. I am so sorry. Jeremy stared down at their joined hands, marveling at how natural the contact felt. No electricity, no dramatic recognition, just the simple human comfort of someone who understood that certain losses changed you permanently and that kindness was the only appropriate response to such transformation. Thank you, he said, turning his palm up to accept her touch completely. That means more than you know. We take care of each other, Carol said simply. People who have waited in rooms like this. We recognize each other, and we do not let each other wait alone unless we have to. Jeremy felt something inside his chest, some tightly held knot of pain and isolation, begin to loosen. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that avoiding connection protected him from further loss. But sitting here, holding Carol's hand while her son healed from injuries Jeremy's company had caused, he began to understand that isolation was not protection. It was simply another kind of loss, self-imposed and therefore more tragic than necessary. Carol, he said carefully, I want you to know that whatever happens with the insurance companies, whatever legal complications arise from Noah's accident, you do not have to face them alone. Jeremy, you do not have to. I know I do not have to. I want to. The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign after years of careful emotional distance. Whatever you need. Medical consultations, legal advice, someone to sit with Noah while you handle paperwork, whatever would help. Carol's eyes searched his face with uncomfortable intensity. Why? You do not owe us anything. We are strangers. Are we? Jeremy asked quietly. Because this does not feel like strangers to me. A monitor beep, beep, beep between them, measuring Noah's steady heartbeat and marking time in a room where 2 adults were discovering that some connections happened immediately, without explanation, without permission, without any regard for practical considerations like corporate liability and family secrets, and the careful walls people built to protect themselves from caring too much. No, Carol whispered. This does not feel like strangers. Jeremy's penthouse apartment overlooked Boston Harbor from the 32nd floor, offering views that architectural magazines frequently described as breathtaking. Glass walls, modern furniture, kitchen equipment he never used, art he had purchased because decorators assured him it was important. Everything perfectly arranged and completely sterile, like a museum display titled, How Successful Men Live When They Have Stopped Believing in Tomorrow. He stood at the windows now, holding a glass of wine he would not drink, watching ferry lights cross dark water like fallen stars. 3 hours ago, he had left Carol at Noah's bedside, promising to return tomorrow with coffee that had actually been brewed in the current decade. 3 hours ago, holding her hand had felt like the most natural thing in the world. Now, alone in his temperature-controlled sanctuary, Jeremy wondered what he was doing. His phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Victor's name appeared on the screen, along with the late evening urgency that usually meant problems requiring immediate attention. Jeremy, we need to talk about the Morrison building situation. What situation? Jeremy wedged the phone between his shoulder and ear, though he already knew the answer. The accident this morning. Kid got hurt when some scaffolding came down. Legal department wants to discuss our exposure before the family retains counsel. Our exposure. As if Noah Adams was a weather event rather than a 6-year-old boy who collected rocks and asked philosophical questions about blue eyes. As if Carol's desperate embrace had been a business transaction rather than the most authentic human contact Jeremy had experienced in 3 years. How badly was the child hurt? Broken ribs, concussion, nothing permanent according to the preliminary medical reports. Lucky break for everyone involved. Jeremy closed his eyes, remembering Noah's small form against white sheets, the careful way Carol had smoothed his blankets, the quiet determination in her voice when she spoke about justice and accountability. Lucky breaks, apparently, were relative concepts. Victor, I need you to pull all the documentation on that project. Safety inspections, material specifications, any modifications to the original plans. Silence stretched across the phone connection like a held breath. Why would you want that information? Because a child was injured on our job site, and I want to understand how it happened. Jeremy, we have insurance for exactly these situations. The legal department will handle everything, negotiate a reasonable settlement, make sure the family understands that admitting fault would complicate everyone's interests. Victor's tone carried the reasonable authority of someone accustomed to managing messy realities. Your involvement is not necessary. Not necessary. Jeremy thought about Carol's calloused hands and tired eyes, about Noah's unconscious trust in a world that had already hurt him, about justice that required power, and power that cost money they did not have. I want to see the documentation, Victor. Jeremy, you have not been actively involved in day-to-day operations since Sarah's accident. These kinds of decisions are exactly why you gave me operational authority. Let me handle this. Sarah's accident. Even Victor could not bring himself to say the words. Drunk driver, pregnant wife, unborn daughter. Everyone in Jeremy's life had learned to speak around the edges of his loss, treating his grief like a landmine that might explode if directly confronted. For 3 years, Jeremy had appreciated that delicate consideration. Tonight, it felt like suffocation. I am actively involved now, Jeremy said quietly. Send me everything. This is not like you. Maybe it should be like me. Jeremy ended the call and returned to the window, watching harbor lights reflect on dark water. Somewhere across the city, Carol was sleeping in a hospital chair beside her son's bed, choosing discomfort over the possibility that Noah might wake and find himself alone. Somewhere in corporate law offices, attorneys were calculating settlement amounts that would compensate for broken ribs and concussions without acknowledging the terror of watching your child disappear behind emergency room doors. And somewhere in Jeremy's chest, something was awakening that felt dangerous and necessary and completely terrifying. The capacity to care about outcomes beyond his own survival. The willingness to engage with complications that had no clean resolutions. The recognition that some connections demanded action rather than passive observation. His computer chimed with an incoming email. Victor had sent the Morrison building documentation with efficient speed and no additional commentary. Jeremy opened the files, spreading construction photos and safety reports across his monitor like evidence in a trial he was just learning to prosecute. The original plans showed scaffolding designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, safety brackets rated for loads 3 times heavier than anything the renovation would require. Material specifications that prioritized durability over cost efficiency. Everything his grandfather would have approved, everything his father would have demanded. The modifications told a different story. Cheaper brackets substituted without engineering review. Safety margins reduced to barely acceptable minimums. Installation procedures altered to save labor costs. Each change individually minor, collectively catastrophic. When January wind hit inadequately secured scaffolding above a sidewalk where children walked to school. Jeremy found the authorization signatures at the bottom of each modification request. Not his, all Victor's. His uncle had been systematically compromising safety standards to reduce project costs, using Jeremy's grief-induced absence to implement changes that no responsible engineer would approve. The savings were significant: 15% reduction in materials costs across multiple projects. But the scaffolding collapse was not an accident. It was the predictable result of valuing profit margins over public safety. Jeremy's phone rang again. Carol's name appeared on the screen, and his heart rate accelerated with automatic alarm. Hospital calls after midnight rarely carried good news. "Carol, is everything all right?" "Noah's awake." Her voice carried exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "He has been asking for someone named Jeremy. I told him I would try to find you. He has been asking for me. Apparently, he remembers you from when they brought him in. He said the nice man with sad eyes promised to take care of his mom." Carol's laugh was soft and slightly overwhelmed. "I do not remember you making that promise. But Noah seems very certain about it." Jeremy felt something crack open in his chest. Children, apparently, heard things adults were too careful to say aloud. "I will be right there." "Jeremy, you do not have to come tonight. Visiting hours are over, and I know you must have work tomorrow." "Carol!" Jeremy was already reaching for his coat, already moving toward the door of his sterile apartment. "I am coming." He drove through empty Boston streets, past buildings his family had designed and constructed, past construction sites bearing the Green Enterprises logo, past monuments to 3 generations of architectural excellence built on principles Jeremy was just beginning to understand his uncle had abandoned. The city looked different at midnight, softer, more honest, less concerned with maintaining appearances that daylight demanded. The hospital parking garage echoed with his footsteps. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows that made everything appear more dramatic than necessary, like a stage set for confrontations that would change everything. Jeremy took the elevator to the pediatric floor, wondering what he would say to a 6-year-old boy who remembered promises no one else had heard. Carol met him at the nurse's station. Her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her clothes wrinkled from sleeping in hospital chairs. She looked beautiful in the way that mothers always looked beautiful when their children were safe. Tired and relieved and glowing with the particular grace that came from successfully protecting what mattered most. "He's still pretty groggy from the pain medication," she warned as they walked toward Noah's room. "But he has been insisting that Jeremy promised to help, and nothing I said could convince him otherwise. Maybe he heard something I did not realize I was saying." Carol stopped walking and turned to study Jeremy's face with uncomfortable intensity. "What does that mean?" "It means some promises are made before we fully understand we are making them." They entered Noah's room quietly, but the boy was awake, blue eyes bright despite exhaustion and medication. He smiled when he saw Jeremy, the uncomplicated joy that children offered to adults who had earned their trust through some mysterious calculus that had nothing to do with logic or precedent. "You came back," Noah said, his voice small but certain. "I promised I would take care of your mom," Jeremy replied, settling into the chair beside the bed. "That means I come back when you need me to. The scaffolding fell on me." "I know. I am very sorry that happened to you." Noah considered this with the seriousness that 6-year-olds brought to important subjects. "Mom says accidents happen sometimes, and it is nobody's fault. But I think somebody must have built it wrong, because scaffolding is supposed to be safe." From the mouths of babes, Jeremy felt the weight of corporate responsibility settling across his shoulders like lead. This child understood intuitively what Jeremy's uncle had deliberately ignored, that safety was not accidental, that structures either protected people or they did not, that someone was always responsible for the difference. "You are right," Jeremy said quietly. "Somebody did build it wrong." Carol's sharp intake of breath was barely audible, but Jeremy felt it like electricity in the air between them. She was beginning to understand that his knowledge of construction insurance and risk management was not theoretical. She was beginning to ask questions that would require answers Jeremy was not sure he could provide without destroying everything fragile and hopeful that was growing between them. "Will they fix it so other kids do not get hurt?" Noah asked. "Yes," Jeremy said with conviction that surprised him. "I promise they will fix it." Another promise made before he fully understood its implications. Another commitment that would require him to act rather than simply exist. Another step away from the careful isolation that had protected him from caring too much about outcomes he could not control. "Jeremy," Carol's voice was soft, uncertain. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" Jeremy nodded and followed her into the hallway, leaving Noah to drift back towards sleep with the contentment of children who trusted adults to handle complications beyond their understanding. Carol led him to a small family conference room, closing the door behind them with careful deliberation. "How do you know so much about what happened to Noah?" she asked directly. "And do not tell me it is because you do business consulting. Nobody develops that level of expertise without personal involvement." Jeremy felt the moment of truth arriving like weather he could not avoid. Carol Adams deserved honesty, but honesty would end whatever connection was developing between them. Once she learned his identity, she would see every kindness as manipulation, every gesture as corporate damage control. She would hate him, and she would be right to hate him. But Noah was right too. Somebody had built the scaffolding wrong, and that somebody worked for Jeremy's company under Jeremy's ultimate authority. Justice required accountability, and accountability required truth, regardless of personal cost. "My name is Jeremy Marcus Green," he said quietly. "Green Enterprises constructed the scaffolding that fell on your son." Carol stared at him for a long moment, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, understanding, and finally something that looked like betrayal. "You own the company." "Yes." "You have known since this morning that your company hurt Noah." "Yes." "And you came to the hospital anyway. You sat with me, held my hand, made promises to my son." Her voice was rising, though she kept it low enough not to disturb other families. "What kind of person does that?" "The kind of person who discovered that caring about you and Noah matters more than protecting myself from liability." "How convenient. How absolutely convenient for you to discover your conscience after your company nearly killed my child." Carol's eyes blazed with the fury of someone who had learned not to trust powerful men bearing gifts. "What is this, Jeremy? Corporate damage control? Make friends with the victim's family so they do not sue?" "No." "Then what? What possible reason could you have for lying to me?" Jeremy felt the careful walls he had built around his heart crumbling like poorly constructed scaffolding. "Because when you grabbed me in that hallway this morning, you touched something I thought was dead. Because watching you love Noah reminded me why caring about other people matters despite the risk. Because for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I might want to be alive for tomorrow." Carol stepped backward as if his words were physical blows. Do not you dare use your grief to manipulate me into feeling sorry for you. I am not asking for your pity. I am asking for the chance to make this right." "Right?" Carol's laugh held no humor whatsoever. "You think you can make this right? Your company's negligence put my son in this hospital, and you want to make it right by playing the role of concerned stranger, by taking responsibility for what my company did, by ensuring it never happens again, by making sure you and Noah have everything you need for his complete recovery. With money. You want to fix this with money. With whatever it takes." Carol shook her head slowly, and Jeremy could see her retreating behind protective barriers he recognized because he had built similar walls around his own heart. "You are just like every other rich man who thinks consequences are for other people. You think you can buy forgiveness, buy absolution, by the right to feel good about yourself despite the damage you have caused. Carol, please, get out. Her voice was quiet, deadly serious. Get out of this hospital. Get away from my son, and do not come back. Carol, I said get out. Jeremy stood in the hallway watching Carol return to Noah's room, watching her close the door between them with gentle finality. Through the window, he could see her settling back into the chair beside her son's bed, smoothing his blankets with the tender attention that had first made Jeremy remember what love looked like. She was right, of course. He was exactly what she accused him of being, a wealthy man who thought money could solve problems created by privilege and negligence. He had lied to her, manipulated her trust, allowed her to care about him while concealing the truth that would destroy any possibility of relationship between them. But he was also something Carol did not yet understand. He was a man who had been dead for 3 years until a desperate woman's embrace had reminded him what it felt like to care about tomorrow. He was someone who had just discovered that justice mattered more than self-protection, that accountability was not optional, that some promises were worth keeping regardless of personal cost. Jeremy Marcus Green walked out of Massachusetts General Hospital knowing he had lost Carol Adams forever, but he also walked out knowing exactly what he needed to do next. And for the first time since Sarah's death, the future felt like something worth fighting for, rather than something to simply endure. Some truths, Jeremy was learning, demanded their own timeline for acceptance. Jeremy stood outside Green Enterprises at 6 in the morning, watching Boston wake up through windows that reflected his haggard face like an accusation. 48 hours had passed since Carol ordered him out of the hospital. 48 hours of sleepless nights and coffee that tasted like regret. 48 hours of seeing Noah's trusting blue eyes every time he closed his own. The building lobby smelled like marble polish and inherited success. 3 generations of architectural excellence reduced to the kind of corporate sterility that impressed clients and hid inconvenient truths. Jeremy's footsteps echoed against granite floors as he made his way to the executive offices, past portraits of his grandfather and father, past awards celebrating structural innovation and community responsibility. How many children had walked safely past Green Enterprises projects over the decades? How many families had trusted his family's reputation for quality and safety? How many mothers had never needed to choose between dignity and survival because Green Enterprises had built things correctly the first time? Victor's office occupied the corner suite that had once belonged to Jeremy's father, all mahogany furniture and leather chairs designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Victor looked up from his computer screen with the careful expression of someone who had been expecting this confrontation since Carol Adams first asked questions about construction insurance. "Jeremy, you look terrible. We need to talk about the Morrison Building project. I told you the legal department would handle everything. There is no need for you to become personally involved in what amounts to routine liability management." Routine liability management. As if Noah's broken ribs and concussion were statistical blips rather than the predictable result of corporate negligence. As if Carol's desperate embrace had been a business transaction rather than the moment Jeremy's heart remembered how to feel. "Show me the original safety specifications for that scaffolding." Victor's carefully maintained composure flickered like a candle in wind. "Jeremy, you have not been actively involved in operational decisions for 3 years. These technical details are exactly why you delegated authority to people with current expertise. Show me the specifications, Victor. This obsession with one minor accident is not healthy. You are allowing your emotions to cloud your business judgment." Victor leaned back in his chair, assuming the paternal authority he had wielded during Jeremy's grief-induced absence. "The boy is fine. The mother will accept a reasonable settlement. Everything will return to normal. Normal. Jeremy thought about Carol's calloused hands and fierce independence, about Noah's innocent questions regarding structural safety, about the way his own chest had cracked open when a desperate woman reached for salvation and found him instead. "Nothing about this is normal," Jeremy said quietly, "and the boy's name is Noah. The mother's name is Carol. They are not statistics in your liability calculations." Victor's eyes narrowed with the calculating look Jeremy remembered from childhood, when his uncle had assessed Jeremy's potential value to the family business. "You have met them. That explains your sudden interest in operational minutiae. I have met them. I care about them. And I want to know why a 6-year-old boy nearly died walking to school past our construction site." Jeremy, personal involvement with liability claimants is exactly the kind of emotional decision-making that destroyed companies. The legal department specifically advises against any contact with affected families until settlements are finalized. The legal department works for me, not the other way around. Does it? Victor stood slowly, moving to the window that overlooked downtown Boston and the Morrison Building site, where yellow tape still fluttered in March wind. "You have been absent from this company for 3 years. I have made every major decision, signed every important contract, managed every crisis that required immediate attention. The board of directors recognizes my operational authority because you abdicated yours." Jeremy felt the familiar weight of guilt settling across his shoulders. After Sarah's death, he had retreated so completely from corporate responsibility that Victor had effectively become the CEO in everything but title. The company had continued to function, projects had been completed, profits had been maintained. Jeremy had assumed that success meant his absence had caused no harm. "I am present now." "Are you? Or are you simply having another emotional breakdown disguised as corporate engagement?" Victor's voice carried the cruel compassion of someone who had watched Jeremy crumble once and expected him to crumble again. "Remember what happened the last time you allowed personal feelings to affect business decisions. Remember how completely you collapsed when reality became too difficult to manage." Sarah. Victor was talking about Sarah, using Jeremy's grief as a weapon to maintain control over decisions that should never have been delegated. Jeremy felt rage building in his chest. Clean, purposeful anger that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with justice. "Show me the Morrison Building documentation, Victor, now." "I will not enable another self-destructive episode by feeding your obsession with this accident." Jeremy walked to Victor's desk and opened the laptop computer, scrolling through project files until he found the Morrison Building folder. The original safety specifications appeared first. Engineered brackets rated for hurricane force winds. Installation procedures that prioritized structural integrity over cost efficiency. Materials sourced from suppliers with decades-long safety records. Then he found the modifications. Cheaper brackets substituted without engineering review. Safety margins reduced to barely legal minimums. Installation procedures altered to save labor costs. Each change, individually minor, collectively catastrophic, when winter weather met inadequately, secured scaffolding above a sidewalk where children walked to school. 15% cost reduction, Jeremy said quietly, reading the summary document. That is what Noah's broken ribs were worth, 15% savings on materials that were already specified for safety. Those modifications were approved by qualified engineers and reviewed by insurance underwriters. Every change met minimum safety standards required by law. Minimum standards. Jeremy felt something cold and terrible settling in his stomach. Our family built this company on excellence, not minimum standards. Our reputation was based on exceeding requirements, not barely meeting them. Your family built this company on profit margins that allowed for philosophical luxury. The current market requires different priorities. Different priorities, like gambling away the safety budget to cover personal debts. Victor went completely still, and Jeremy knew he had found the truth beneath the corporate language. His uncle had not been making strategic business decisions. He had been stealing money from safety budgets to cover losses that had nothing to do with Green Enterprise's legitimate operations. "I do not know what you think you have discovered. I think I have discovered that you have been embezzling company funds to pay gambling debts. And Noah Adams nearly died because you needed to recoup money you lost at illegal poker games." Jeremy's voice remained calm, controlled, deadly serious. "I think I have discovered that my uncle is a criminal who has destroyed our family's reputation to finance his addiction." Victor's carefully maintained facade cracked completely, revealing the desperate man underneath. "You do not understand the pressures I have been managing while you wallowed in self-pity for 3 years. You do not understand what it takes to keep this company profitable when the CEO disappears into grief and leaves real men to make difficult decisions. Difficult decisions like cutting safety corners that put children in hospitals. One minor accident that resulted in non-permanent injuries to one child whose mother will be compensated for any inconvenience." Victor's voice rose with the hysteria of someone whose lies were collapsing. "You are willing to destroy our family legacy over one accident that changes nothing fundamental about our operations. It changes everything fundamental about our operations." Jeremy closed the laptop and faced his uncle directly. "As of this morning, you no longer have any authority at Green Enterprises. All projects will be reviewed for safety compliance. All modified procedures will be reversed, and all substandard materials will be replaced regardless of cost. You cannot do this. The board will not support decisions based on emotional breakdown rather than business logic. Watch me." Jeremy walked toward the door, then turned back to face the man who had systematically destroyed everything 3 generations had built. "And Victor, you have until end of business today to provide complete documentation of every safety budget modification you have implemented, every project, every change, every dollar that was supposed to protect people like Noah Adams but ended up paying your bookies instead. Jeremy, you are making a terrible mistake. That woman, Carol Adams, she is manipulating your emotions to extract maximum settlement value. She sees a wealthy man with guilt over circumstances beyond his control, and she is using your feelings to improve her negotiating position." Jeremy paused with his hand on the door handle, thinking about Carol's tired eyes and determined voice, about the way she had smoothed Noah's blankets with infinite tenderness, about her fury when she learned his identity and ordered him out of their lives. "No, Victor. Carol Adams wants nothing from me except for me to stay away from her son. She has more integrity in her calloused fingers than you have in your entire body." Jeremy opened the door and stepped into the hallway. "The documentation. End of business today. Do not disappoint me again." Jeremy left Green Enterprises, knowing he had just declared war on his own uncle. Knowing the next few weeks would determine whether his family's company survived the scandal that was about to emerge. But he also left knowing that Noah Adams would never again be endangered by corporate decisions that prioritized profit over children's safety. Some battles, Jeremy was learning, were worth fighting regardless of personal cost. Carol pushed Noah's wheelchair through the hospital's rehabilitation wing, watching her son concentrate on the physical therapist's instructions with the serious determination that 6-year-olds brought to important challenges. 2 weeks had passed since Jeremy Green revealed his identity and destroyed every naive assumption Carol had made about kindness from strangers. "Lift your right arm as high as you can. Noah, good. Now rotate your shoulders slowly." "Excellent work." Noah beamed at the praise, his blue eyes bright with the resilience that had amazed every medical professional involved in his care. Children bounced back, the doctors kept saying, as if survival was a choice rather than a miracle requiring infinite vigilance from mothers who could not afford to let their guard down. "Mom, watch this!" Noah lifted his arm above his head, wincing slightly, but completing the motion with stubborn pride. Dr. Martinez says I will be ready for regular playground activities in 3 more weeks. 3 more weeks of physical therapy at $200 per session. 3 more weeks of specialist consultations and follow-up x-rays and medical equipment rental. 3 more weeks of choosing between Noah's recovery and keeping their apartment, between his future mobility and her own survival. Carol had stopped calculating the mounting debt. Mathematics had become an enemy that offered no solutions, only evidence of problems, too large for her resources to address. The hospital's financial counselor had provided estimates that looked like telephone numbers, figures so astronomical they felt fictional rather than real. "You are doing wonderfully, sweetheart," Carol said, managing a smile that felt more genuine than expected. "I am so proud of how hard you are working. I want to be strong again, so we can go to the park and I can show you my rock collection." Noah's voice carried the matter-of-fact optimism that had sustained them both through the worst nights. "And so you do not have to worry about money anymore." Carol's throat tightened with love and fury in equal measure. 6 years old, and Noah was already learning that his medical needs created financial stress his mother tried unsuccessfully to hide. 6 years old, and he was developing the kind of premature responsibility that children acquired when adults failed to protect them from complicated realities. "Money is my job to worry about, not yours," Carol said gently. "Your job is to get strong and happy and ready for adventures. But I heard you crying last night when you thought I was sleeping." Children heard everything, every whispered phone conversation with insurance companies, every late-night calculation of bills versus income, every moment of despair that adults believed they had hidden successfully. Carol had learned that maternal strength required constant performance, that vulnerability was a luxury single mothers could not afford. Sometimes grown-ups need to cry when they are worried, just like children do. It does not mean anything terrible is happening. It just means feelings are big sometimes. Noah considered this with the philosophical seriousness that had charmed every hospital staff member. "Jeremy said he would help us. Did he lie?" Jeremy. The name still felt like betrayal in Carol's mouth, carrying implications she was not ready to examine. Rich men who posed as concerned strangers while concealing their corporate responsibility for the very crisis they pretended to care about. Rich men who thought money could purchase forgiveness for negligence that nearly killed children. "People sometimes make promises they cannot keep," Carol said carefully. "And sometimes people are not who they pretend to be. But he seemed nice, really nice, not pretend nice." Noah's faith in his own judgment was both heartbreaking and terrifying. Children trusted instinctively, believing that adult kindness was genuine until experience taught them otherwise. Carol had lost that innocence years ago, but she envied her son's willingness to see goodness in powerful men who had already demonstrated their priorities through actions rather than words. "Sometimes nice people make bad choices," she said finally. "And sometimes we have to protect ourselves from people who hurt us, even if they seem nice." After Noah's therapy session, Carol wheeled him to the hospital's business office for another meeting with financial counselors who specialized in transforming medical emergencies into manageable payment plans. The waiting room smelled like industrial carpet and broken dreams, filled with families who had discovered that health insurance was theoretical protection until actual catastrophe revealed its limitations. "Miss Adams?" A woman in a navy blue suit approached with the kind of professional smile that preceded difficult conversations. "I am Patricia Lawson from the hospital's patient advocacy department. We have been reviewing your account and I have some options to discuss." They settled into a small conference room with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick, regardless of their actual health status. Noah colored quietly in his wheelchair, while the adults discussed numbers that would determine whether his recovery proceeded smoothly or became a source of ongoing family stress. Your insurance has covered approximately 60% of Noah's medical expenses to date, Patricia began, consulting papers that documented financial catastrophe in neat columns. The remaining balance is $47,836. $47,000. Carol felt the number settle in her stomach like lead. Her annual freelance income barely exceeded $30,000 in successful years. The remaining medical debt represented more money than she had earned in the past 18 months combined. However, Patricia continued, we have received inquiries from Green Enterprises regarding assumption of all medical expenses related to Noah's accident. They are prepared to establish a medical trust fund that would cover current bills, ongoing therapy, and any future complications related to his injuries. Green Enterprises, Jeremy's company, offering money to ease the guilt of corporate negligence. Carol felt familiar fury rising in her chest, the particular anger of someone who had learned not to trust gifts from people who had already demonstrated their willingness to harm her family. What conditions are attached to this generous offer? Patricia's professional smile flickered slightly. The trust fund would be established contingent upon your agreement to certain liability limitations and confidentiality provisions. They want me to sign away my right to sue them in exchange for paying medical bills their negligence created. The legal language is more complex than that, but essentially, yes. Carol looked at Noah, absorbed in his coloring and trusting that the adults would handle complications beyond his understanding. $47,000 in medical debt versus corporate accountability for safety violations that could happen again. Her son's physical recovery versus justice for other children who might face similar dangers if Green Enterprises continued prioritizing profit over public safety. I need to think about it. Of course, but Miss Adams, I should mention that the offer includes a significant settlement amount beyond medical expenses, enough to ensure Noah's future education and provide financial security for your family. Financial security. The phrase felt foreign, impossible, tempting in ways that made Carol question her own moral clarity. Noah could attend college without debt. They could move to an apartment with a playground. She could reduce her work hours and spend more time helping him recover completely. All she had to do was agree that Jeremy Green's company bore no responsibility for nearly killing her son. How much? The question emerged before Carol could stop herself. $800,000 plus the medical trust fund. Carol felt the world tilt sideways. $800,000 was more money than she had imagined possessing, enough to transform every aspect of their lives. Noah's college education, a house with a garden, financial stability that would eliminate the constant stress of choosing between basic necessities. All she had to do was accept that justice was less important than survival. I need to think about it, Carol repeated, though she could already feel her resolve wavering under the weight of practical necessity. Patricia handed her a business card and a folder containing documents that would determine their future. Take all the time you need, but Miss Adams, opportunities like this rarely remain available indefinitely. Carol drove home through afternoon traffic, watching Noah doze in his car seat and wondering whether refusing $800,000 made her principled or simply foolish. Other mothers would accept the settlement immediately, grateful for financial security that would benefit their children regardless of its moral complications. Other mothers would prioritize practical outcomes over abstract concepts like corporate accountability. But other mothers had not held their injured sons while rich men lied about their identities. Other mothers had not discovered that kindness could be a mask for manipulation, that protection could become another form of exploitation. Carol parked outside their modest apartment building and helped Noah into his wheelchair, noting how carefully he maneuvered around obstacles that had not existed in his world 2 weeks ago. The physical therapy was working, but recovery was measured in increments that required patience and hope in equal measure. "Mom?" Noah's voice was sleepy but curious. "Are we going to be all right?" "We are going to be fine, sweetheart. We are going to figure everything out, even without Jeremy's help." Even without Jeremy's help, Carol looked at her son's trusting face and felt her heart break for the innocence he was losing, the adult complications he was beginning to understand despite her efforts to protect him from financial realities. "Yes, baby, even without Jeremy's help. We take care of each other, remember? We do not need anyone else to be a family." But as Carol helped Noah prepare for bed that night, she found herself thinking about $800,000 and wondering whether pride was worth the cost of her son's uncertain future, whether justice mattered more than security, whether she had the right to choose principles over practical outcomes that would benefit Noah long after childhood ended. Some decisions, Carol was learning, required more strength than she was certain she possessed. Jeremy stood in his grandfather's study, surrounded by architectural awards and photographs documenting 3 generations of structural excellence. The room smelled like leather and legacy, filled with reminders of what green enterprises had represented before corporate greed replaced engineering integrity. His grandfather's blueprint cabinet held designs for buildings that still stood throughout New England, monuments to the principle that public safety was never negotiable. On the mahogany desk, spread like evidence in a trial that would determine his family's future, lay Victor's documentation of every safety modification implemented during Jeremy's absence. 15 projects compromised, over $200,000 diverted from safety budgets to cover gambling losses. A pattern of negligence so systematic it constituted criminal conspiracy rather than mere corporate oversight. The Morrison building was not an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of 3 years' worth of systematically weakened structures throughout Boston, any one of which could fail without warning and kill innocent people going about their daily lives. Jeremy's phone buzzed with another call from Victor, the 17th attempt to reach him since morning. He had stopped answering after the 5th call, when his uncle's desperate explanations had devolved into threats about family loyalty and promises to reform that carried no credibility whatsoever. The front door chimed with the arrival Jeremy had been expecting since dawn. Patricia Lawson from Massachusetts General Hospital's business office, carrying documents that would formalize Green Enterprises' acceptance of full financial responsibility for Noah's medical care. Clean corporate accountability that acknowledged fault without admitting criminal negligence. "Mr. Green, thank you for meeting with me personally. The hospital administration wanted to express their appreciation for your company's proactive approach to this unfortunate situation." Jeremy gestured toward the chair across from his desk, noting how Patricia's professional demeanor carried undertones of relief. Hospital administrators lived in constant fear of families who could not pay medical bills, of insurance companies that denied coverage, of legal battles that consumed resources better spent on patient care. "Have you spoken with Miss Adams about the settlement offer?" "I presented the terms yesterday afternoon. She requested time to consider the proposal." Patricia's careful phrasing suggested Carol's reaction had been less than enthusiastic. "I believe she is concerned about certain legal implications." Concerned about legal implications. Jeremy translated this diplomatic language into Carol's probable fury at discovering his company was attempting to purchase her silence along with her gratitude. She would see the settlement offer as confirmation that his hospital presence had been corporate damage control rather than genuine care. She would be wrong. But Jeremy understood why the evidence would support that conclusion. What was her specific response? She asked about conditions attached to the financial assistance. When I explained the liability limitations and confidentiality provisions, she became less receptive to the proposal. Less receptive. Jeremy could imagine Carol's green eyes blazing with indignation. her protective instincts activated by recognition that powerful men were attempting to transform her son's suffering into a business transaction with predetermined outcomes. Remove the liability limitations. Patricia's professional composure flickered with surprise. Sir, remove all conditions except medical necessity. Green Enterprises will establish a trust fund to cover Noah Adams' complete medical care, current bills, ongoing therapy, future complications, anything related to his injuries. No legal restrictions, no confidentiality requirements, no conditions whatsoever. Mr. Green, I must advise you that unconditional medical coverage creates significant legal exposure for your company. Without liability limitations, you are essentially accepting full fault for the accident while maintaining no protection against civil lawsuits. Yes, the hospital's legal department specifically recommends against unconditional settlements in liability situations. The precedent could be extremely costly if other accident victims expect similar treatment. Then we will treat other accident victims similarly. Patricia stared at him as if he had suggested donating company assets to random strangers. Corporate executives did not accept unlimited liability without legal protection. Successful businessmen did not acknowledge fault without negotiating restrictions on future consequences. Smart money managers did not establish precedents that could bankrupt their companies if applied consistently. Sir, I'm not certain you understand the financial implications of unconditional medical coverage. I understand that a 6-year-old boy nearly died because my company chose profit margins over public safety. I understand that his mother is considering whether to sacrifice justice for financial security. I understand that removing conditions from our settlement offer allows her to make that choice without coercion from us. Jeremy stood and walked to the window overlooking the harbor, watching sailboats navigate between shipping lanes with the careful attention required when larger vessels shared water with smaller ones. Boston looked beautiful in afternoon sunshine, a city built on principles of innovation and community responsibility that Jeremy's family had helped establish through generations of conscientious construction. Mr. Green, may I ask why you are taking this unusual approach to liability management? Because liability management should not exist when a company causes harm through negligence. Because accountability should not be conditional upon the victim's willingness to accept limitations on their right to seek justice. Jeremy turned back to face Patricia's bewildered expression. Because Green Enterprises was built on the principle that public safety is never negotiable, and I intend to restore that principle regardless of cost. Patricia gathered her papers with the careful movements of someone who had just witnessed a business decision that contradicted everything she understood about corporate behavior. I will communicate your terms to Miss Adams this afternoon. And Patricia, please tell Miss Adams that this offer comes with no expectation of gratitude, no requirement for interaction with Green Enterprises, and no assumption that financial assistance creates any relationship between our companies and her family. She owes us nothing except allowing us to fulfill our responsibility to repair harm we caused. After Patricia left, Jeremy returned to his grandfather's desk and the documentation of Victor's systematic destruction of family values. The evidence was comprehensive enough to support criminal charges for embezzlement, reckless endangerment, and criminal conspiracy. Federal prosecutors would be interested in a case involving workplace safety violations that endangered children. OSHA investigators would want to examine every project Green Enterprises had completed during the past 3 years. Jeremy picked up his phone and dialed the number for the Boston District Attorney's office. Some decisions required courage rather than calculation, accountability rather than self-protection, justice rather than convenient settlements that allowed guilty parties to escape consequences. District Attorney's office? How may I help you? I need to report corporate safety violations that resulted in injury to a child. I believe criminal charges may be appropriate. Can you hold while I transfer you to our white-collar crime division? Jeremy held, listening to classical music while watching Boston Harbor and thinking about Noah's trusting blue eyes, about Carol's fierce determination to protect her son from powerful men who thought money could solve problems created by negligence. He thought about his grandfather's architectural principles and his father's community values, and the legacy he wanted to rebuild from the wreckage Victor had created. When the prosecutor answered, Jeremy provided his name, his company's information, and a complete confession of everything he had discovered about safety budget embezzlement and systematically compromised construction projects. He offered full cooperation with any investigation, unlimited access to company records, and his personal testimony against his uncle if criminal charges were pursued. By the time Jeremy finished his phone call, he had effectively declared war on Victor, potentially destroyed Green Enterprises' financial stability, and guaranteed that Noah Adams' accident would become a public scandal involving criminal prosecution of his own family member. But he had also ensured that other children would not face similar dangers, that corporate accountability would not be optional, and that Carol Adams could pursue justice without choosing between her principles and her son's medical care. Some battles, Jeremy was discovering, became worth fighting the moment you realized who you were supposed to protect. Carol stood in the construction workers' break area outside Massachusetts General Hospital, sharing coffee and conversation with Miguel Santos during his lunch hour. 3 weeks had passed since Patricia Lawson delivered Green Enterprises' unconditional settlement offer, 3 weeks of questioning whether Jeremy's motives were genuine or simply more sophisticated manipulation. The safety brackets were definitely wrong for that application, Miguel said, his weathered hands wrapped around a paper cup that looked toy-sized against his calloused fingers. I told Mr. Victor multiple times that those lightweight brackets would not hold in wind conditions, but he insisted the engineering department had approved cost modifications. Did you see the engineering approval? No, ma'am. Mr. Victor said the paperwork was being processed through corporate, that field supervisors did not need to review technical documentation. Miguel's voice carried the frustration of someone who had been overruled by people who understood spreadsheets better than structural physics. But 37 years of construction experience teaches you when something is not right, regardless of what paperwork says. Carol made notes in the small notebook she had started carrying, documenting conversations that painted a picture of systematic negligence rather than isolated accident. Miguel was the third Green Enterprises employee who had agreed to speak with her, each one confirming similar patterns of safety shortcuts and cost-cutting measures implemented without proper engineering review. Were other projects affected by these modifications? Most projects over the past 2 years. Mr. Victor would review material specifications and suggest alternatives that saved money. Always presented as engineering improvements, always approved by people who never visited job sites. Miguel paused, studying Carol's face with uncomfortable intensity. Ma'am, can I ask why you are investigating this personally? Most families would accept the company's settlement offer and move on with their lives. Most families would accept $800,000 and unconditional medical coverage, grateful for financial security that eliminated uncertainty about their children's futures. Most mothers would prioritize practical outcomes over abstract concepts like corporate accountability. Most people would recognize that justice was expensive luxury that working families could not afford to pursue. Because other children walk past construction sites every day, Carol said quietly. Because mothers should not have to choose between their children's safety and corporate profit margins. Because someone needs to ask difficult questions about why safety standards are treated as optional expenses rather than mandatory requirements. Miguel nodded slowly, recognition dawning across his weathered features. You are fighting for other people's kids, not just your own. I am fighting for the idea that children matter more than quarterly profit reports. that public safety should not be negotiable regardless of how much money companies want to save. That is unusual thinking for someone who could walk away with financial security. Carol thought about Noah's medical bills and uncertain future, about the apartment with thin walls and neighbors who played music too loud, about the constant mathematics of survival that consumed mental energy she would prefer to spend on her son's recovery. $800,000 would solve every practical problem while creating new questions about whether she had betrayed other families facing similar dangers. "My son asked me why scaffolding fell on him," she said finally. "I want to be able to tell him the truth, that someone made it right, that other children will not face the same danger, that his suffering accomplished something meaningful beyond corporate settlements. And what if the truth costs your family's financial security? Then we will find another way to be secure. But we will do it without accepting money that comes with silence about preventable dangers to other people's children." Miguel studied her face for a long moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded envelope. "I have been carrying this around for 2 weeks, trying to decide whether to give it to you." Carol accepted the envelope, noting Miguel's careful handwriting across the front. "Evidence of safety violations, Green Enterprises Projects, 2022-2025. What is this?" "Documentation of every safety modification I was ordered to implement during the past 3 years. Photographs of substandard materials, copies of work orders that contradicted engineering specifications, records of conversations where I raised safety concerns that were dismissed." Miguel's voice dropped to barely above whisper. "Everything you would need to prove that Noah's accident was not an isolated incident, that Green Enterprises has been systematically compromising public safety to improve profit margins." Carol felt the envelope's weight like evidence in a trial she had not realized she was preparing to prosecute. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because 37 years of building things teaches you that foundations matter. Structures are only as strong as their weakest components, and companies are only as trustworthy as their willingness to prioritize safety over profit." Miguel stood slowly, gathering his lunch equipment with deliberate care. "Your boy deserves to know that his accident led to changes that protect other children. You deserve to have the ammunition necessary to make those changes happen." Carol watched Miguel return to the construction site across the street, then opened the envelope to examine documentation that could transform Noah's accident from personal tragedy into public catalyst for corporate accountability. Photographs showed safety equipment that clearly did not match engineering specifications. Work orders demonstrated systematic substitution of cheaper materials without proper approval. Email exchanges revealed a pattern of safety concerns raised by field workers and dismissed by management focused on cost reduction. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, and potentially worth millions of dollars in punitive damages if she chose to pursue civil litigation rather than accept Green Enterprises' settlement offer. But the evidence also represented something more valuable than money: proof that fighting for justice could accomplish meaningful change, that refusing to accept convenient silence could protect other families from similar tragedies. Carol's phone buzzed with a text message from Noah's physical therapist, confirming tomorrow's appointment and noting his excellent progress toward full recovery. Her son was healing beautifully, developing strength and confidence that would serve him throughout his life. The medical bills were manageable thanks to Jeremy's unconditional settlement offer, which had eliminated financial pressure without requiring legal concessions. She had everything she needed for her family's security and happiness. Everything except certainty that other children would not face similar dangers because Green Enterprises continued prioritizing profit over public safety. Carol drove home through afternoon traffic, thinking about $800,000 versus an uncertain legal battle that could consume years and cost more than she could afford to lose. Miguel's documentation provided ammunition for a fight, But fighting required resources and determination that might be better invested in Noah's future education and their family's stability. Some decisions, Carol was learning, required choosing between personal security and public responsibility, between accepting comfortable compromise and pursuing uncomfortable truth, between taking care of your own family and protecting other people's children from dangers they did not yet recognize. The choice felt impossible until she remembered Noah's questions about why scaffolding had fallen on him, about whether someone would fix the problem so other kids stayed safe, about whether the nice man named Jeremy had been telling the truth when he promised to help. Carol parked outside their apartment and looked up at windows that would remain home regardless of her decision about Green Enterprises' settlement offer. Noah was waiting inside, probably working on homework and looking forward to showing her new drawings that demonstrated his artistic recovery along with his physical healing. He deserved answers that included justice along with medical care. He deserved to know that his accident had led to changes that protected other children from similar tragedies. He deserved a mother who chose difficult truth over convenient silence, even when truth cost more than she could easily afford to pay. Some battles, Carol was realizing, became necessary the moment you understood who you were supposed to protect. Jeremy sat in his office reviewing legal documents that would formalize his cooperation with federal prosecutors investigating Green Enterprises' safety violations. Outside his windows, Boston Harbor stretched toward horizons that had once represented unlimited possibility. Now the view reminded him of distances that felt impossible to cross. The space between intention and action, between guilt and redemption, between corporate responsibility and personal accountability. The intercom buzzed with his secretary's careful voice. "Mr. Green, Mr. Victor is here requesting an immediate meeting. He says it is urgent regarding the Morrison building situation." Jeremy had been expecting this confrontation since federal investigators arrived to examine company records 3 days ago. Victor's desperate phone calls had escalated to threatening emails, then to visits to Jeremy's apartment building that security had been instructed to discourage. Eventually, his uncle would be forced to confront the reality that Jeremy was cooperating with criminal prosecution rather than protecting family interests. Send him in. Victor entered Jeremy's office with the controlled desperation of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. His expensive suit could not disguise the weight loss and sleepless nights that had marked the past month. His silver hair remained perfectly styled, but his eyes carried the wild look of cornered animals who had exhausted all escape routes. "Jeremy, we need to discuss the direction this Morrison building investigation is taking. Federal prosecutors contacted my attorney this morning with questions that suggest someone has been providing them with privileged company information. I have been providing them with complete access to company records, including documentation of safety budget modifications you implemented without board approval." Victor's carefully maintained composure cracked completely. "You are cooperating with federal prosecutors who are investigating your own family's company. You are destroying 3 generations of business success to pursue a vendetta against decisions you were not present to evaluate. I am accepting responsibility for harm our company caused through criminal negligence. I am ensuring that other children do not face similar dangers because we prioritized profit margins over public safety. One accident, Jeremy, a minor accident involving non-permanent injuries to one child whose family will be generously compensated for any inconvenience." Victor's voice carried the hysteria of someone whose justifications were evaporating under scrutiny. "You are willing to destroy our family's legacy over one accident that changes nothing fundamental about construction industry practices. One accident." Jeremy thought about Noah's trusting blue eyes and Carol's fierce determination about Miguel Santos raising safety concerns that were systematically ignored, about other mothers who had no idea their children faced daily dangers from structures built with compromised materials and inadequate oversight. It was not one accident, Victor. It was the predictable result of 3 years' worth of systematically weakened safety standards. It was preventable harm caused by your gambling addiction and criminal embezzlement of funds specifically allocated to protect public safety. My personal financial difficulties have no bearing on legitimate business decisions made within my operational authority. Your gambling debts directly caused you to steal money from safety budgets, which directly caused inadequate materials to be used in construction that directly resulted in a scaffolding collapse that nearly killed a 6-year-old boy. Jeremy stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street where people moved through their daily lives, trusting that buildings would not fall on them without warning. The causal chain is clear, Victor. Your addiction endangered children. Jeremy, you are allowing emotional involvement with that woman and her son to cloud your business judgment. Carol Adams is manipulating your guilt to extract maximum settlement value, and you are too blinded by romantic fantasy to recognize obvious manipulation. Jeremy felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. What did you say? I said Carol Adams is using her son's accident to manipulate your emotions for financial gain. She sees a wealthy man with guilt over circumstances beyond his control, and she's exploiting your feelings to improve her negotiating position. Victor's tone carried the cruel satisfaction of someone revealing uncomfortable truths. She has rejected our generous settlement offer because she recognizes she can extract more money by maintaining your personal involvement in her family's situation. Carol rejected the settlement offer because she wants accountability rather than money, because she cares more about protecting other children than securing her own family's financial future. How refreshingly naive. A single mother facing catastrophic medical debt turns down $800,000 because of moral principles. Victor's laugh held no humor whatsoever. Jeremy, that woman is playing you like a violin. She knows exactly which emotional buttons to push to maintain your interest and increase her eventual payout. Jeremy thought about Carol's calloused hands and tired eyes, about the way she had ordered him out of the hospital when she learned his identity, about her refusal to accept any conditions on medical assistance that would limit her right to pursue justice. She had gained nothing from rejecting his company's settlement offer except the right to fight a legal battle she could not afford against opponents with unlimited resources. You are wrong about her. Am I? Then why has she been conducting her own investigation into company practices? Why has she been interviewing construction workers and collecting documentation that could support civil litigation? Why has she hired a personal injury attorney who specializes in corporate negligence cases? Jeremy felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Carol was investigating green enterprises independently, building a case for civil litigation that could cost his company millions of dollars beyond the settlement offer they had already made. She was preparing to sue them despite their acceptance of full medical responsibility and acknowledgement of fault. How do you know about her investigation? I know because I make it my business to understand threats to this company's financial stability. I know because Carol Adams is not the grieving mother seeking justice that you believe her to be. She is a calculating woman who recognized an opportunity to extract maximum compensation from a guilty corporation led by an emotionally compromised CEO. Victor moved closer, his voice dropping to the conspiratorial tone he had used during Jeremy's childhood to share secrets that made them allies against adult authority. Jeremy, I understand your attraction to this woman. She is beautiful, intelligent, and she presents herself as a victim deserving protection. But she is using your feelings to destroy our family's company while positioning herself to benefit financially from our destruction. Jeremy stared at his uncle, seeing clearly for the first time the manipulative skills that had allowed Victor to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars while convincing Jeremy that operational delegation was appropriate during his grief recovery. His uncle was a master at presenting self-serving arguments as concern for Jeremy's well-being, at disguising personal agenda as family loyalty. Even if everything you say about Carol is true, it does not change what you did to the safety budgets. It does not excuse the gambling addiction, or the embezzlement, or the criminal negligence that put children in danger. What I did was make difficult decisions to keep this company profitable during the worst economic conditions the construction industry has faced in decades. What I did was preserve the legacy your grandfather built while you disappeared into self-pity over circumstances that were tragic but not your fault. What you did was steal money specifically allocated to protect public safety. What you did was gamble with other people's lives to cover your personal debts. Victor's facade of reasonable concern evaporated completely, revealing the desperate criminal underneath. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I used company funds to cover personal obligations. Yes, I modified safety specifications to reduce costs and improve profit margins. Yes, I made decisions during your absence that you might not have approved if you had been functional enough to participate in operational management. Jeremy felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, the final destruction of family loyalty that had survived despite mounting evidence of Victor's corruption. But Jeremy, Victor continued, everything I did was necessary to preserve this company during your emotional collapse. Everything I did was designed to protect our family's interests while you wallowed in grief over a woman who was dead and a baby who never lived. I saved Green Enterprises while you were busy feeling sorry for yourself. Sarah. Victor was using Sarah's death as justification for criminal behavior, suggesting that Jeremy's grief had forced his uncle to become a criminal, suggesting that corporate embezzlement was somehow Jeremy's fault for failing to recover from devastating loss quickly enough to prevent Victor's descent into gambling addiction. Get out of my office. Jeremy, you need to understand that your cooperation with federal prosecutors will destroy this company and eliminate hundreds of jobs for working families who depend on Green Enterprises for their livelihoods. You need to consider consequences beyond your personal need to feel heroic about one accident involving one child. Get out of my office, Victor. You no longer work for this company, and you are no longer welcome in this building. I own 30% of this company. I cannot be dismissed like a common employee. You will be dismissed like the criminal you are. Federal prosecutors will be filing embezzlement charges, and the board of directors will vote to terminate your ownership stake based on criminal breach of fiduciary duty. Jeremy moved to his desk and pressed the security button that would bring guards to escort unwelcome visitors from the premises. You have 5 minutes to collect personal belongings from your office before security removes you from the building. Victor stared at him with the hatred of someone whose manipulation had finally been recognized and rejected. You are making the biggest mistake of your life, Jeremy. When Carol Adams takes you for everything you are worth in civil court, when federal prosecutors destroy our family's reputation with criminal charges, when this company collapses under legal fees and regulatory scrutiny, remember that you chose her over your own family. I chose accountability over criminal conspiracy. I chose other people's children over corporate profit margins. I chose justice over convenient cover-ups that allow dangerous practices to continue. Jeremy met his uncle's furious glare without flinching. I chose to be someone my grandfather would recognize rather than someone he would be ashamed to claim as family. Security guards arrived and escorted Victor from the office, leaving Jeremy alone with the silence that followed confrontations that changed everything permanently. Through his windows, Boston looked the same as it had that morning, but Jeremy felt fundamentally different, cleaned of family obligation that had enabled criminal behavior. free to pursue justice without considering how accountability might affect people who had forfeited their right to protection through their own choices. His phone rang with a call from the federal prosecutor handling the Green Enterprises investigation. Jeremy answered, knowing that his cooperation would likely destroy his company's financial stability while ensuring that Victor faced appropriate consequences for endangering public safety. Mr. Green, we have reviewed the documentation you provided, and we are prepared to file criminal charges against Victor Green for embezzlement, criminal conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. We wanted to confirm your continued cooperation as a witness for the prosecution. You have my complete cooperation, Jeremy said, watching Victor's car disappear into Boston traffic. Whatever testimony you need, whatever additional documentation would be helpful, whatever it takes to ensure accountability for what happened to Noah Adams and prevent similar tragedies in the future. After the call ended, Jeremy sat in his office thinking about Carol's independent investigation and her refusal to accept settlement offers that would have solved all her practical problems. Whether she was pursuing justice or financial advantage no longer mattered. What mattered was ensuring that other children did not face similar dangers, that corporate accountability was not optional, that safety standards protected people rather than profit margins. Some battles, Jeremy was learning, were worth fighting regardless of who else was fighting them or why. Jeremy stood in his empty penthouse at 3 in the morning, watching Boston sleep beneath a blanket of November snow. Tomorrow, federal prosecutors would announce criminal charges against Victor. Tomorrow, the media would descend on Green Enterprises like vultures drawn to corporate scandal. Tomorrow, 3 generations of architectural excellence would be reduced to headlines about gambling addiction and safety violations that nearly killed a child. The press conference was scheduled for noon. Jeremy would stand before cameras and microphones, accepting full responsibility for his company's negligence while announcing the dissolution of Green Enterprises as it currently existed. Every project would be reviewed, every safety modification reversed. Every corner that Victor had cut would be rebuilt to exceed original specifications regardless of cost. The financial projections were devastating. Complete safety remediation would cost approximately $12 million. Legal settlements for affected families could reach $20 million more. Federal fines and regulatory compliance would add another $8 million to the total. Green Enterprises would survive, but barely drew, transformed from a profitable corporation into a barely solvent entity dedicated to correcting past negligence. Jeremy's personal fortune would evaporate. The penthouse, the investment portfolio, the comfortable isolation that money provided, all sacrificed to ensure that other children did not face Noah's dangers, that other mothers did not choose between justice and survival. He should feel devastated. 3 years ago, losing everything would have seemed impossible to survive. But standing here now, preparing to destroy his own financial security for the sake of strangers' children, Jeremy felt something he had not experienced since Sarah's death. Peace with his own choices, satisfaction with his own moral courage, anticipation for a future built on principles rather than profits. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Jeremy hesitated, then opened it, expecting another reporter seeking exclusive access to tomorrow's story. Instead, he found 2 photographs that stopped his heart completely. The first showed Noah Adams sitting in a sunny classroom, arm raised eagerly to answer a teacher's question. His cast was gone, his smile radiant, his blue eyes bright with the intellectual curiosity that had charmed every hospital staff member. He looked healthy, happy, completely recovered from injuries that could have stolen his childhood. The second photograph showed Carol Adams standing in what appeared to be a legal aid office, shaking hands with an attorney while Miguel Santos looked on approvingly. She wore a navy blue dress that emphasized her professional determination. her auburn hair pulled back to reveal the strong jaw Jeremy remembered from hospital corridors. She looked beautiful, confident, ready to fight battles that mattered more than money. Below the photographs, a single line of text. "Thank you for choosing truth over convenience. Some people recognize integrity when they see it. A friend." Jeremy stared at the message until his vision blurred with unexpected emotion. Someone was watching his choices, evaluating his decisions, offering encouragement that felt more valuable than any financial compensation. Someone understood that tomorrow's press conference represented moral victory rather than corporate defeat. He suspected the friend was Miguel Santos, the construction foreman whose conscience had provided Carol with evidence of systematic safety violations. Miguel had worked in construction long enough to recognize rare executives who prioritized public safety over profit margins, who accepted accountability rather than hiding behind corporate lawyers and insurance settlements. Jeremy saved the photographs and returned to his window, watching snow accumulate on streets where children would walk to school in the morning. Those children deserved to trust that buildings would not fall on them, that adult decisions prioritized their safety over corporate convenience. Tomorrow's press conference would help ensure that trust was warranted. His computer chimed with another message, this one from his attorney reviewing the statement Jeremy would read at tomorrow's press conference. Legal counsel had strongly advised against accepting full responsibility without liability limitations, against acknowledging fault that could support civil lawsuits, against statements that prioritized accountability over corporate protection. Jeremy had overruled every legal recommendation. Tomorrow's statement would acknowledge complete fault, accept unlimited liability, and promise comprehensive safety remediation regardless of cost. The words would probably destroy his company's financial stability while providing ammunition for every family affected by Victor's negligence. But the words would also ensure that no mother faced Carol's choice between justice and survival, that no child wondered why scaffolding had fallen on them, that corporate accountability meant more than favorable insurance settlements. Jeremy opened the statement and read it one final time, noting how each sentence felt both terrifying and absolutely necessary. Green Enterprises accepts complete responsibility for safety violations that endangered public welfare and directly caused injury to Noah Adams. We acknowledge that cost-cutting measures implemented without proper engineering review created dangerous conditions that should never have existed. We commit to comprehensive remediation of all affected projects, full cooperation with criminal prosecution, and establishment of victim compensation funds that prioritize family needs over corporate interests. The words would make him poor, probably destroy his company, certainly end his comfortable isolation from consequences beyond his personal survival. They would also make him someone his grandfather would recognize, someone his father would respect, someone Sarah would have loved for his willingness to choose difficult truth over convenient lies. Jeremy closed the computer and prepared for bed, knowing he would sleep better tonight than he had in 3 years. Tomorrow would bring media scrutiny, financial devastation, and public examination of failures he could have hidden behind corporate lawyers and insurance companies. But tomorrow would also bring alignment between his actions and his values, between his wealth and his character, between his grief and his capacity for meaningful contribution to other people's welfare. Some nights, Jeremy was learning, peaceful sleep required expensive choices that felt absolutely worthwhile. Carol stood outside the federal courthouse in downtown Boston, watching television news crews position cameras for Jeremy Green's press conference. 2 months had passed since she rejected Green Enterprises' settlement offer, 2 months of legal preparation and evidence gathering that had transformed Noah's accident from personal tragedy into public accountability campaign. Her attorney, David Chen from Massachusetts Legal Aid had warned her that corporate press conferences usually contained carefully scripted apologies designed to minimize legal exposure while appearing to accept responsibility. Executives expressed regret without admitting fault, acknowledged tragedies without accepting liability, promised improvements without guaranteeing compensation for past negligence. "Do not expect meaningful admissions," David had advised that morning. "Expect public relations theater designed to influence potential jurors while protecting corporate interests." But Carol had seen something in Jeremy's grey eyes during those hospital conversations that suggested he was capable of genuine accountability rather than performed remorse. Despite Victor's manipulation attempts, despite corporate lawyers' certainly advice against accepting unlimited liability, Jeremy had chosen to cooperate with federal prosecutors and support criminal charges against his own uncle. Those were not the actions of someone prioritizing corporate protection over public safety. The courthouse steps filled with reporters, cameras, and federal prosecutors who would announce criminal charges immediately following Jeremy's statement. Carol noticed Miguel Santos standing near the media area, his weathered face serious as he prepared to serve as a witness for the prosecution. His documentation had provided crucial evidence of systematic safety violations spanning multiple projects over 3 years. At exactly noon, Jeremy emerged from the courthouse, surrounded by attorneys who looked like they were attending a funeral rather than a press conference. He appeared thinner than Carol remembered, his expensive suit unable to disguise the weight loss that suggested sleepless nights and decisions that cost more than money. But his posture remained straight, his expression calm, his grey eyes clear with the particular confidence that came from moral certainty. He approached the microphone cluster without notes, without teleprompter, without the careful preparation that usually characterized corporate communications. When he began speaking, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had chosen truth over convenience regardless of personal cost. "My name is Jeremy Marcus Green, and I am here to accept complete responsibility for safety violations that endangered public welfare and directly caused injury to 6-year-old Noah Adams." Carol felt her breath catch. Complete responsibility. Not partial fault, not shared liability, not the careful language that distributed blame among multiple parties while protecting corporate interests. Jeremy was accepting unlimited accountability for his company's negligence. Green Enterprises, under my ultimate authority, implemented cost-cutting measures that compromised structural safety to improve profit margins. These modifications were made without proper engineering review, without consideration for public welfare, and without regard for the children who trusted that our buildings would not fall on them. Cameras clicked, and reporters scribbled notes as Jeremy continued, his statement becoming more damaging to his own interests with every sentence. He was destroying his company's legal position while providing evidence that would support massive civil lawsuits from every family affected by Victor's safety violations. Victor Green, my uncle and former business partner, embezzled approximately $200,000 from safety budgets to cover gambling debts. His criminal actions directly caused the scaffolding collapse that injured Noah Adams. I failed to detect this embezzlement because I had abdicated operational oversight during my personal grief recovery. Carol watched Jeremy's face as he acknowledged his own failures alongside Victor's crimes, accepting accountability rather than deflecting blame onto his uncle's addiction. This was not public relations theater designed to minimize legal exposure. This was genuine confession from someone who understood that leadership meant accepting consequences for subordinates' actions. Effective immediately, Green Enterprises will fund comprehensive safety remediation for all projects completed during the past 3 years. We will establish victim compensation funds that prioritize family needs over corporate interests. We will implement safety protocols that exceed federal requirements and submit to independent oversight that ensures public welfare remains our highest priority." Jeremy paused, looking directly into the cameras that would carry his words to families throughout New England who had trusted his company with their safety. To Noah Adams and his mother Carol, "I am profoundly sorry that our negligence endangered your family. No child should face dangers created by adult decisions that prioritize profit over their welfare. Your courage in demanding accountability will protect other families from similar tragedies." Carol felt tears sliding down her cheeks as Jeremy concluded his statement and submitted to questions from reporters who seemed stunned by the unprecedented nature of his admissions. Corporate executives did not usually provide opposing attorneys with confession that would support unlimited liability claims. Wealthy men did not typically choose accountability over self-protection when legal alternatives existed. But Jeremy was doing exactly that, sacrificing his company's financial stability and his personal fortune to ensure that other children remained safe from the negligence that had nearly killed her son. Federal prosecutors followed Jeremy's press conference with announcement of criminal charges against Victor Green: embezzlement, criminal conspiracy, reckless endangerment, and fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, the case straightforward, the sentencing guidelines severe for crimes that endangered children's lives to cover gambling debts. Justice was happening. Not the abstract concept that seemed impossible when powerful corporations faced working families in legal battles, but actual accountability with real consequences for people whose decisions had prioritized money over public safety. Carol found herself standing outside the courthouse as media crews packed their equipment and crowds dispersed. Jeremy remained on the steps, speaking quietly with federal prosecutors about his continued cooperation as a witness for the prosecution. He looked exhausted but peaceful, like someone who had finally aligned his actions with his values regardless of personal cost. When the prosecutors departed, Jeremy noticed Carol watching from across the plaza. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance that had separated them since her discovery of his identity months ago. Then Jeremy walked slowly toward her, his expression uncertain but hopeful. "Carol, that was extraordinary," she said quietly. "I did not expect corporate executives to confess in public that their negligence nearly killed my son. I am not most corporate executives." "No," Carol agreed, studying his face and seeing exhaustion, determination, and something that looked like peace with expensive choices. "You are not." They stood together in November sunshine, two people who had found each other through tragedy and discovered that shared values mattered more than shared circumstances. Jeremy had sacrificed everything to ensure that other families did not face Noah's dangers. Carol had risked financial security to demand accountability that would protect other children. Neither had chosen the easy path, but both had chosen the right path. "Jeremy," Carol said carefully, "would you like to have coffee sometime? I think we have things to discuss." Jeremy's smile was the first genuine happiness Carol had seen from him since that day in the hospital corridor when Noah's questions about integrity had revealed more about character than any corporate press conference could demonstrate. "I would like that very much." Snow fell gently outside the small cafe where Jeremy and Carol sat across from each other, sharing coffee and conversation that felt both familiar and entirely new. 3 weeks had passed since the press conference that had transformed Jeremy from wealthy executive into public advocate for corporate accountability. 3 weeks since federal prosecutors announced Victor's indictment on charges that could result in 15 years in federal prison. "Noah asks about you," Carol said, wrapping her hands around a ceramic mug that warmed her fingers against December's chill. "He wants to know if the nice man with sad eyes will visit again." Sad eyes. Jeremy's smile carried self-awareness that had been absent during their first hospital encounters. I suppose that was accurate. I am not sure it still applies. Carol studied his face, noting how the weight loss and stress lines somehow made him more attractive rather than less. Suffering had stripped away the corporate polish that had initially marked him as another wealthy man accustomed to solving problems with money. What remained was simpler, more genuine, infinitely more appealing. What does apply now? Hopeful eyes? Maybe. Peaceful eyes. Eyes that belong to someone who finally understands what his life is supposed to accomplish. They had been meeting weekly since the press conference, cautious conversations that rebuilt trust through demonstrated consistency rather than romantic declarations. Jeremy never mentioned the financial devastation his choices had created. Carol never discussed the civil lawsuit her attorney was preparing against Green Enterprises. They focused instead on Noah's recovery, on the safety reforms Jeremy was implementing, on the victim compensation fund that would help other families affected by Victor's negligence. David Chen says your cooperation with the prosecution has been unprecedented, Carol said carefully. He says corporate executives usually hire armies of lawyers to minimize their legal exposure, not provide evidence that supports criminal charges and civil litigation. David Chen is a good attorney who cares more about justice than billable hours. He is also impressed by clients who prioritize accountability over self-protection. Jeremy looked out the window at snow accumulating on streets where children would walk safely to school, past buildings that met safety standards rather than minimum legal requirements. I spent 3 years hiding from responsibility for anything beyond my own survival. When I finally chose to engage with consequences that mattered to other people, the decision felt inevitable. Inevitable. Like something I should have done long ago. Like the person I was supposed to be if grief had not convinced me that isolation was protection rather than just another form of loss. Carol felt something warm and hopeful blooming in her chest. This was the Jeremy she had glimpsed during hospital vigils, before corporate identity had complicated their connection. This was someone who understood that healing came through engagement rather than withdrawal, that meaning emerged from contribution rather than accumulation. Noah would like to see you again, she said quietly. If you are interested in spending time with children who ask difficult questions about adult integrity. I am very interested in spending time with Noah and with his mother. If she would be willing to trust me again despite the lies I told about my identity. Those were not exactly lies. More like incomplete information shared by someone who was still learning what his identity actually meant. Jeremy reached across the small table and covered her hand with his, the same gesture of comfort he had offered during their first hospital conversation. But now the touch carried no deception, no hidden corporate interest, no ulterior motive beyond the simple human desire for connection with someone whose values aligned with his own. Carol, I need you to know that everything I felt during those hospital days was genuine. My attraction to you, my affection for Noah, my desire to help your family, none of that was corporate damage control or manipulation designed to minimize legal exposure. I know. Carol turned her palm up to accept his touch completely. I think I knew even when I was too angry to admit it. People cannot fake the kind of gentleness you showed Noah, the way you listened without offering solutions I had not requested. Then why did you reject the settlement offer? Why pursue legal action that could have been avoided if you had accepted our acknowledgement of fault and financial compensation? Carol considered how to explain decisions that had felt necessary despite their personal cost. Because accepting money with no strings attached felt too much like charity. Because I needed to know that accountability was genuine rather than performed for public relations purposes. Because other families deserved protection that could only come through legal precedent and regulatory oversight. And now, I have seen you sacrifice everything to ensure that other children remain safe. Now I have watched you choose truth over convenience when legal alternatives existed. Now I understand that some people actually mean it when they promise to make things right." Jeremy felt something that had been frozen for 3 years begin to thaw completely. Not just the capacity to care about another person, but the willingness to risk caring again, despite inevitable vulnerability that love required. Carol represented everything he had avoided since Sarah's death. Emotional investment in someone he could lose, commitment to outcomes beyond his control, engagement with a future that offered no guarantees except shared hope and mutual support. "Carol, would you consider allowing me to be part of your family's life, not as corporate executive seeking to limit liability, but as someone who loves you and Noah and wants to build something meaningful together?" Carol's smile was radiant, as morning sunshine after storms that had threatened to destroy everything precious. "I would consider that, very seriously. But Jeremy, yes? Noah will expect you to understand that being part of our family means showing up consistently, keeping promises that matter to children, and accepting that love requires action rather than just intention. I understand, and I am ready for that kind of responsibility." Outside their cafe window, snow continued falling on a city where children would walk safely to school, past buildings constructed with integrity rather than minimum legal standards. Jeremy and Carol sat together planning a future built on principles they had discovered through adversity, values they had chosen despite easier alternatives, love they had earned through moral courage rather than simple attraction. Some conversations they were learning felt like coming home to possibilities they had always been meant to discover. Spring arrived in Boston with the particular joy that followed difficult winters, transforming the city into something green and hopeful and alive with possibility. Jeremy stood in the playground at Franklin Park, watching Noah climb monkey bars with the confident grace that marked his complete physical recovery. 6 months had passed since the press conference that had destroyed Jeremy's company and rebuilt his character. 6 months since Carol had agreed to trust him again, despite corporate deceptions that had nearly ended their relationship before it truly began. "Higher, Jeremy. Watch me go higher." Noah's voice carried across the playground with the fearless enthusiasm that had sustained him through medical procedures, physical therapy, and adult conversations about justice that he understood better than most grown-ups. His blue eyes sparkled with health and happiness as he navigated climbing equipment that had been thoroughly inspected for safety compliance. "I am watching," Jeremy called back, marveling at how natural it felt to be the adult that children looked to for attention and approval. "You are getting stronger every day." Carol approached from the picnic table where she'd been organizing papers for the Noah Adams Foundation, the victim advocacy organization they had established to help families navigate medical crises and corporate liability claims. Her auburn hair caught afternoon sunlight as she moved with the easy confidence that had attracted Jeremy during their first hospital encounter. "Mr. Santos called with an update on the Riverside construction case," she said, settling beside Jeremy on the bench that provided perfect views of Noah's playground adventures. 3 more families have joined the safety violation lawsuit, and OSHA investigators found evidence of the same cost-cutting measures Victor used at Green Enterprises. Miguel is turning into quite the corporate watchdog. Miguel is enjoying his new role as safety consultant for construction workers who want to report violations without losing their jobs. Carol's smile carried satisfaction that came from meaningful work rather than simple financial security. Amazing how much courage people find when they know someone will support them against retaliation. The Noah Adams Foundation had processed 47 cases during its first 6 months of operation, helping families understand their rights when corporate negligence affected their children's health and safety. Jeremy's personal fortune What remained after Green Enterprises' safety remediation and victim compensation funds provided resources for legal assistance, medical advocacy, and temporary financial support for families who could not afford to fight corporations with unlimited legal budgets. Any word from the sentencing hearing? Victor received 12 years in federal prison, plus restitution requirements that will follow him for the rest of his life. Carol's voice carried no satisfaction in his punishment, only relief that accountability had been achieved. Judge Morrison said gambling addiction did not excuse criminal decisions that endangered children's lives. 12 years. Jeremy felt the weight of family obligation finally lifting completely. Victor would face consequences proportionate to his crimes rather than hiding behind corporate lawyers and insurance settlements. Other construction workers would see that safety violations carried real penalties rather than minor regulatory fines. Children would be marginally safer because one gambling addict had been held accountable for prioritizing personal debt over public welfare. "Mom, Jeremy, come push me on the swings." Noah's request interrupted Jeremy's contemplation of justice achieved and futures secured through moral courage rather than financial advantage. He and Carol walked hand in hand toward the swing set, moving with the comfortable synchronization that had developed during months of shared responsibility for Noah's happiness and security. "Higher!" Noah demanded, as Jeremy began pushing the swing with gentle consistency. "I want to fly like birds. Flying takes practice," Jeremy said, adjusting his pushes to Noah's preferred rhythm. "But I think you are getting closer every day. When I learn to fly, I will visit all the kids who got hurt by bad construction and tell them they are going to be okay." Jeremy felt his throat tighten with emotion that had become familiar over recent months, the particular pride that came from watching children develop moral courage, from seeing them understand that healing required helping others rather than focusing exclusively on personal recovery. "That sounds like an excellent use of flying abilities." Carol watched Jeremy interact with her son, noting how naturally he had assumed parental responsibilities that David had never managed during 6 years of biological connection. Jeremy remembered Noah's preferences for bedtime stories, his philosophical questions about fairness and safety, his need for adults who kept promises rather than offering convenient explanations when commitment became inconvenient. More importantly, Jeremy understood that loving Noah meant accepting long-term responsibility rather than temporary affection. He had shown up consistently for medical appointments, school events, and playground adventures that marked the difference between casual interest and genuine commitment to family formation. "Jeremy," Carol said, as they walked back toward the picnic table while Noah explored other playground equipment, "I have something to ask you." "Of course." "Noah wants to know if you would consider being his dad officially. Not just the nice man who takes care of his mom, but actually his father in all the ways that matter legally and emotionally." Jeremy stopped walking, overwhelmed by implications he had hoped for, but never dared to request directly. Adoption would mean accepting Noah as his son completely, taking legal responsibility for his welfare, becoming family rather than simply someone who cared about their family. "What do you want, Carol?" "I want the man I love to become Noah's father officially. I want us to be a family that exists in law as well as heart. I want Noah to have the security of knowing that someone has chosen him permanently rather than temporarily." Jeremy felt something that had been broken 3 years ago finally heal completely. Not the replacement of lost family with new family, but the recognition that love multiplied rather than diminished when shared with people who deserved complete commitment. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes to adoption. Yes to legal family formation. Yes to everything that makes us permanent rather than provisional." Carol's smile was radiant as spring sunshine after the longest winter. "Noah will be thrilled. He has been practicing writing Noah Green on his school papers for weeks. They returned to the playground bench, watching Noah navigate climbing equipment with the physical confidence that marked his complete recovery and the emotional security that came from adults who prioritized his welfare over their own convenience. Jeremy thought about the chain of events that had brought them together: tragic accident, corporate negligence, moral choices that had cost everything except what mattered most. "Carol," he said quietly, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not grabbed me in that hospital corridor? I think about it sometimes. I think we would have found each other eventually, because people with shared values have a way of recognizing each other regardless of circumstances. Even if I had remained a corporate executive prioritizing profit over people, you were never really that person. That was just someone you were pretending to be because grief had convinced you that caring led inevitably to loss." Carol took his hand, threading their fingers together with the natural ease that had developed during months of chosen commitment. "The man who caught me when I was falling, who stayed with Noah during surgery, who chose accountability over self-protection, that was always who you really were." Noah ran toward them, his face bright with the joy that made every adult decision worthwhile. "Can we go home now? I want to show Jeremy my new pictures of the foundation helping families." Home. Jeremy felt the words settle in his chest with the warmth that came from belonging somewhere, being needed by people whose welfare mattered more than his own comfort, building something meaningful rather than simply accumulating wealth that provided isolation rather than connection. They walked together toward the car, three people who had found each other through tragedy and chosen to create family through love rather than biology, through commitment rather than convenience, through shared values rather than shared circumstances. Jeremy thought about the embrace that had started everything, Carol's desperate reach for salvation that had found him instead of her absent brother, random accident that had felt like destiny, confusion that had led to recognition, mistake that had become the foundation for everything meaningful in their lives. Some embraces, Jeremy was learning, changed everything precisely because they were unexpected. 1 year after Noah's accident, Jeremy stood before another microphone cluster, this time announcing the opening of the Noah Adams Safety Training Center, a facility where construction workers would receive comprehensive education about public safety protocols, where families could learn their rights when corporate negligence affected their loved ones, where corporate executives would study the human cost of prioritizing profit over people. The training center occupied the renovated Morrison building, transformed from a symbol of corporate negligence into a monument to accountability and community responsibility. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided natural light for classrooms where workers would learn that safety was never optional, that corners should never be cut when children's lives depended on structural integrity. This facility represents our commitment to ensuring that Noah Adams' accident becomes the last preventable construction injury in Boston, Jeremy said, speaking to an audience that included federal regulators, construction workers, family advocates, and reporters who had followed the Green Enterprises scandal from criminal indictment through corporate transformation. Carol stood at the side of the makeshift stage, holding Noah's hand while he fidgeted with the excitement that 6-year-olds brought to ceremonies where adults made speeches about important subjects. He wore his best shirt, blue like his eyes, and a smile that suggested he understood this event was somehow connected to his recovery and his family's happiness. The Noah Adams Foundation has helped 83 families navigate corporate liability claims during our first year of operation, Jeremy continued. We have supported legislative changes that strengthen safety regulations, funded legal assistance for families who cannot afford to fight corporations with unlimited resources, and provided medical advocacy for children whose injuries resulted from preventable accidents. Miguel Santos sat in the front row, his weathered face proud as he listened to descriptions of changes that his conscience had helped initiate. He had become the training center's lead safety instructor, teaching other workers to recognize violations and report them without fear of retaliation. His documentation had supported criminal prosecutions in 3 additional cases involving corporate executives who had prioritized profit over public safety. But this facility represents more than institutional change, Jeremy said, looking directly at Carol and Noah. It represents the recognition that some embraces change everything, that some accidents lead to healing rather than just harm, that some families are formed through choice rather than chance, through commitment rather than convenience. As Jeremy concluded his remarks, Noah tugged on Carol's hand with the urgency that suggested important 6-year-old business requiring immediate adult attention. "Mom, can I tell everyone about the hug?" Carol smiled and lifted Noah to her hip, carrying him toward the microphone where Jeremy waited with the patient expression that had become familiar during months of Noah's philosophical questions and spontaneous observations about adult behavior. "Noah has something he wants to share," Carol announced, adjusting the microphone to accommodate her son's height. Noah looked out at the audience with the unself-conscious confidence that children possessed before experience taught them that public speaking was supposed to be frightening rather than simply conversation with more people than usual. "My mum hugged Jeremy by mistake in the hospital," Noah said, his voice clear and serious. "She thought he was someone else, but he was not someone else. He was exactly who we needed him to be, even though we did not know it yet." The audience laughed gently, charmed by Noah's matter-of-fact delivery of profound truth about serendipity and recognition, about how accidents sometimes led to exactly the right outcomes despite appearing to be entirely wrong circumstances. "Jeremy says some hugs change everything," Noah continued. "I think that is true, because before Mom hugged him, we were just me and Mom being sad about scary things. After she hugged him, we became a family that helps other families not be scared about scary things." Jeremy felt his eyes fill with tears that he no longer tried to hide. Children had a way of distilling complex emotional truths into simple statements that captured everything adults struggled to express through elaborate explanations. "And now Jeremy is my dad," Noah concluded with satisfaction that suggested he had covered all the important points. "Not because anyone made him be my dad, but because he chose to be my dad. And that is the best kind of dad to have." The audience erupted in applause that felt like celebration rather than mere politeness, recognition of a family formed through love rather than biology, of healing achieved through community rather than isolation, of accountability chosen rather than imposed. As the ceremony concluded and guests toured the training facility, Jeremy found himself standing with Carol and Noah in the lobby, where photographs documented the Foundation's work with families affected by corporate negligence. Children's drawings covered one wall, pictures of safe buildings, happy families, and adults who kept promises to protect young people from dangers they should never have to face. "Jeremy," Noah said, tugging on his father's jacket with the persistent attention-seeking that had become wonderfully familiar. "Can we go to the park after this? I want to show you how high I can swing now." "Of course we can go to the park, but first, I have something important to give you." Jeremy knelt to Noah's eye level and withdrew a small wrapped box from his jacket pocket. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a simple silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a blueprint, the architectural symbol that represented Jeremy's profession and his commitment to building things that lasted. "This belonged to my grandfather," Jeremy said, as he fastened the necklace around Noah's neck. "He believed that everything we build should make the world safer for children. I want you to have it as a reminder that some things are built to last forever." Noah touched the pendant with reverent fingers, understanding instinctively that he was receiving something precious, something that connected him to family history and future responsibility. "Will you teach me to build safe things when I grow up?" I will teach you everything I know about building things that protect people instead of endangering them. Carol watched her son and husband, the word still felt new and wonderful, exchange this moment of connection that bridged past loss and future possibility. Jeremy had not replaced the family he had lost, but had created new family that honored both his grief and his capacity for continued love. "Are you ready to go home?" she asked, though home now meant the house they had purchased together in a neighborhood where Noah could walk safely to school, where children played in yards surrounded by construction that met safety standards rather than minimum legal requirements. "Yes," Jeremy said, standing and gathering his family close. "I am ready to go home." They walked together through doors that opened onto Boston streets, where spring was transforming winter's damage into new growth, where children moved safely past buildings, constructed with integrity rather than mere compliance, where families like theirs created hope rather than simply surviving circumstances beyond their control. As they reached their car, Noah looked up at Jeremy with the philosophical curiosity that had charmed everyone from hospital staff to federal prosecutors. "Jeremy, do you think Mom would have found you even if she had not hugged you by mistake?" Jeremy considered the question seriously, thinking about all the choices and chances that had brought them together, all the ways that love found people who were ready to receive it, despite believing they were too damaged to deserve it. "I think your mom and I were always supposed to find each other," he said finally. "Sometimes it just takes an unexpected hug to help people recognize what they have been looking for." Noah nodded with satisfaction, as if this explanation aligned with his own 6-year-old understanding of how important things happened in the world. He climbed into his car seat, already chattering about playground plans and construction projects and the various ways that adults could make the world safer for children who trusted them to build things correctly. Jeremy and Carol looked at each other across their son's excitement, sharing the smile that had become their private language for gratitude too deep for words. They had found each other through tragedy and built family through choice, created meaning through moral courage, and discovered that some embraces did indeed change everything. As Jeremy started the car, and they drove through neighborhoods where children played safely in yards surrounded by construction that prioritized their welfare over corporate profits, Carol reached across the seat to take his hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me save you." Jeremy squeezed her fingers gently, thinking about hospital corridors and desperate embraces, about choices that had cost everything except what mattered most, about family formed through love rather than biology, and maintained through commitment rather than convenience. "Thank you," he replied, "for recognizing that some people are worth saving." In the back seat, Noah hummed contentedly as Boston passed outside his window, a city where children could trust that adults had built things with their safety in mind, where families like his helped other families navigate corporate accountability, where unexpected embraces led to exactly the right outcomes even when they began as entirely wrong circumstances. Some stories, Noah was learning, ended with everyone finding exactly what they needed, even when they had not known they were looking for it, and some hugs really did change everything. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.